In the heart of the state-of-the-art, at the dawn of the next stage in entertainment, you found No Proscenium.
You have indeed found No Proscenium. I am your host, Noah Nelson. Welcome to the last show of 2021 on this, the last day of 2021. In a few moments, we're going to kick it on over to the crew, and we have just this kind of freewheeling conversation about the year that was. A little bit of housekeeping before we go forward. There will be no episode next week. Originally, this was because we were going to be deep in production on the Next Stage Summit and Mini Festival. But of course, thanks to the incredible COVID surge that's going on right now with Omicron, we had something like... I don't know, 5 figures. The cases are in the 5 figures. The good news is hospitalizations and deaths are not going up. But of course, with this many people testing positive, with this many people sick, lots of folks are quarantined right now, as they should be. You see this happening on Broadway. You see this happening everywhere. I don't need to tell you unless you really have been avoiding the news. So we're not doing it. I might talk a little bit at the very, very end about that. In fact, I think I will. There's my promise to you. If you want to hear me wax poetic about that, fast forward. Listen to the whole thing, and then you'll find me at the end. Don't skip over this one. This was a good one, and you can kind of tell. I was dreading this possibility. You hear it a couple of times in the discussion. We recorded this. I believe we recorded this on the 22nd, I want to say. We might have recorded it on the 21st. I might say later on. Obviously, I haven't re-listened to the piece. This has been an incredibly strange year, and we're going to get into that. Before we head off, let me just do a quick few shout-outs. First off, as always, thank you to all our Patreon backers, but definitely thank you to our sustaining backers who keep a roof over my head. That would be Ari Herstand, Brittany, Deborah Robinson, Elaine, Jay Bushman, Jerome Joseph Genties, David Bassick, Lonnie Hands-On, Mark Baltazar, Samuel Mystery, Sydney Guillory, and Jan Budman. Thank you all so much for keeping us going. We are, like I said, taking a hiatus next week. That does not mean we're not publishing. We will have a few things to go into publishing queue next week, but it's going to be a lighter week still. Mostly because there's a lot of planning to be done. For those of you who had badges for the next stage, we are in the process of getting all of the money that was taken out of the Eventbrite account back into the Eventbrite account. The wire transfers are under process. Hopefully, the wire transfers will be resolved. I'm hoping by Wednesday of next week. That's my hope. And then as soon as they're done, I'm going to hit bulk refund and boom. My goal is to get everyone their money back before the event was supposed to happen. And this is full refunds, no partial refunds this time. We were very lucky in that we are not on the hook for anything. The Pasadena Sheridan was amazing and let us off our obligations given what's going on. There's a lot of work to be done. There's this event. As it was designed, will not take place at any point. We've tried twice now. Not going to go third time's the charm. But that doesn't mean that we will not have a festival. It doesn't mean that we won't have a summit. It doesn't mean that we won't be doing probably a lot of events in 2022. We just want to redesign things so that this stops happening to us because it hurts a lot. Anyway, that's the logistical side. I'll probably talk a little bit more on the back end for those who really want it. Okay. And on that note, I hope you have a fantastic weekend. And if you're canceled your New Year's plans or whatnot, then you get to hang out with us. And I hope we're not too depressing. I don't think we are. I think this is a pretty good conversation. All right. Bye. Here we are at the end of another very strange year. It is the end of 2021 episode of No Proscenium. You'll note there was maybe no music at the start. We just like dropped in on it. And joining me tonight from deep out in the valley in Los Angeles, our LA editor.
Hi, this is Kevin Gossett.
And from somewhere, and I don't actually know where, and that's fine. I'm not going to reveal any more than that. Also in LA, our arts editor.
Hi, Laura Hess.
And out there on the East Coast, our East Coast editor at large,
Blake Weil. Yes, your East Coast exile.
And tonight we're just going to look back on the year that was. So we're trying to find a way to hang a structure on this one, and we're recording this on Tuesday, December 21st. This should release on Thursday the 30th. So 9 days that could be very different in 9 days, because as everyone knows, we're in the middle of the Omicron surge, which has freaked New York City right out. We've had one death in Texas so far confirmed to be linked to Omicron. And of course, Delta is still running around, right? People are acting like Omicron's pushing Delta out of the mix. Nah, there's a lot of Omicron. Delta's still doing its thing. So a very, very strange Christmas that feels giving some people flashbacks to March 2020, which for the record, I will definitively say is my least favorite month of all time.
Especially now that you're in month, what is it now? 22 of it?
Yeah, pretty much. Maybe 21, 22, whatever it is. Who knows what will have happened between when we record this and when we drop this. I may need to give a thing at the beginning, but for a minute, I thought we were going to do seasonal. I think Kevin rightly pointed out that he could not remember what he did back in the spring. And then he asked, what if we could hang on some bigger themes? And that prompted me to think of this. So we kind of got back from pure online stuff into some in-person things in June and July. That's when it kind of came alive here in LA. June is when Meow Wolf opened, Omega Mart opened in Las Vegas, and has been doing gangbusters. Apparently, I heard some statistic that more people have been through Omega Mart in 6 months than in a year worth of House of Eternal Return. Don't quote me on that, but that's something I heard. I think someone said it here on the podcast a week ago. Callback. Who was that? Was that Todd? Was that Scott? I think it was one of those guys. So that sort of changed. I kind of feel like changed everything. What for all of you? What was the moment where this year started to feel different? Even if now it's feeling different a different way. Just all the differences. Kevin, how about you? When did 21 stop feeling like 20?
So I think, as you pointed out, stuff kind of started up back here in July. I think that was around when I hit Grassroots District, which was it was a fun show. It was outside. That was when it started to maybe we're headed towards something. And then I think when we actually had a true spooky season in LA was when it was okay, it feels like we're normal. Everything felt safe a couple months ago. We had Creep, we had Delusion, Horror Nights was back. Everything was kind of in full swing, and it felt good to be back in that world and that zone, which is my favorite part of LA's immersive scene is that kind of spooky season run, because there's a lot of it here. We do err on the side of horror themed stuff or creepy themed stuff. But that was when I felt it was okay, this is immersive feels back in a way that I really enjoy it.
Yeah. And there's something I was struck by thinking about, things feeling safe. And, we know a lot of the performers in delusion and creep and all the stuff that happens. And like, I mean, obviously people aren't going to necessarily go and broadcast if they got sick at a show, right? Like the performers, which, isn't necessarily the best thing. But I don't recall there being like any kind of cast spread in October. Like no show wound up doing a sick out. I don't remember that happening. I don't remember.
No, I didn't hear anything about it. No.
Yeah.
Nothing.
I mean, maybe people would like try and hide it from us, but like, it's some things are kind of hard to hide. So yeah, and I think so. I think it not only felt safe, I think it possibly was safe the way things were operating. Laura, how about for you? Oh, go.
Oh, I was going to say, with the masks and the vaccines were like, it was like really in that kind of full swing in kind of late September, early October. So I think it did it was safe. Like, that's what it was. Everyone was masked in these shows. Everyone had vaccines. Like they were checking the cards, and it felt safe. And it seems like it was, because as you mentioned, there wasn't kind of anything that we heard about, at least, compared to, I think, now where we're kind of are hearing more.
Yeah. Laura, how about for you?
I think it was very similar. I actually did go to Vegas in July. I will say that was, and I did a bunch of stuff at Area 15, and I had done, I think a couple weeks before that in Los Angeles, I started doing some things. I had a leftover ticket from the Nest pre-pandemic. I was able to use that. That might have been later in July. I went to Chromasonics Satellite 1. I think that was a little bit earlier in June. And so I was starting to be able to do these things. And I think that in some of those situations, like the Nest and Satellite 1, because it was so intimate, there were so few people, and the COVID protocol was so closely followed, it felt unnerving in some ways, but it also felt so liberating. And I was so grateful to be able to have these experiences. And I mean, I've talked about both of those, and they're such beautifully designed, incredible experiences. So it felt just so massively restorative and energizing and inspirational. Being in Vegas was definitely, I mean, I knew it was a risk, and I tried to be as safe as possible, but I was very cognizant of and I got early tickets for Omega Mart, and it was, I mean, within a couple of hours, it was absolutely packed, and it was unnerving. And so there was this interesting dichotomy of feeling like we've just been released from a cage, and sort of feeling like, I so often use food metaphors, and I'm just going to stick with that. And it really felt like being able to sit down to this wonderfully rich, incredibly flavorful meal after so long of eating the same bland food, something like that. And yet it was all laced with this fear and even just the being out of practice, being around that many people. So I do think that it was an interesting dichotomy of feeling incredibly grateful and feeling nourished in ways that I hadn't been for so long. And yet I was very aware of the danger. There was a kind of underlying anxiety throughout all of it. And I think that it was similar to what Kevin is saying. I think it was a couple months later that even though that was really when Delta was starting to hit, at least in the US, and then strangely in like September, October, it started to feel like, well, maybe we really are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And it felt like some of that laced anxiety was dissipating.
Yeah.
And so there have been such interesting peaks and valleys within this whole process. And now I feel like we're back to, a very high
valley.
Level.
Yeah. A deep valley, a peak of surge, but a valley of depression.
Right, exactly. Unfortunately.
Right. And just, obviously thinking very hard about, do the tools that we've been using successfully so far are they gonna hold up? And not just in the short term, not just because like I'm facing, this drops a week before when we have the summit planned to go. And as of this recording, we're still planning on doing the summit. There could be a shift between now and then, like a total shift. And every day we like talk about, well, what are we going to do? Like, do we need to adjust things? Do we need to shut down? Which is a full on repeat of what I did almost to the day. Like it's almost in this exact same period of time. Like I'm having such strong March 2020 flashbacks right now. And yet, projecting forward, how many more times are we going to have these sorts of cycles? And do the tools we have, all the tools, vaccines, booster vaccines, masks, social distancing, UV lights, HEPA filters, all that stuff, how well will it hold up in a world where, the order does not come down from on high that we're going to full on lockdown, break all the transmission chains and just ride it out and let it die out, which a possibility that seems to have gone completely out the window in March of 2020, in February of 2020, like the die was cast. And what does that mean for all of this work? Because we had that lovely fall here, and it felt like, even with the masks, like, oh, we can get those feelings back. We can do this kind of work. We can go to stuff, and yeah, I don't know.
I don't know if we want to shift the conversation at this point, but I'm just going to throw out there, because I think it could be an interesting segue, is that as we're talking about kind of these peaks and valleys, and Blake, I don't mean to trump your opportunity to talk about, your timeline, but...
Oh, no, do not worry about this. This is a tough act to follow. It gives me more time to think of anything worthwhile to say here.
Well, I do think that, I think one interesting, or at least noteworthy point to make that we can potentially open up to a larger conversation is that because we've had these interesting peaks and valleys, and that maybe didn't go the way that we'd hoped that they would, I also think that has opened up more dialogue around... I feel like there's been a perspective, and maybe it's an erroneous perspective, but I feel like there's been a perspective that digital theater was a placeholder. And I feel like now we are on that kind of event horizon of saying, you know what, digital theater is not a placeholder. And even for people who were very enthusiastic about remote experiences, Kevin, I know that wasn't quite your jam. I have loved so many of the remote experiences that I've done. I'm so grateful to these amazing creators. And I think that now, as we're navigating this landscape, we're seeing that I think there's more people settling into this idea that these things, the spectrum of what theater is. So obviously I'm specifically talking about theater, but I think, whether it's virtual escape rooms, the sort of broader topic of how do all of these things live under the experiential umbrella, and not looking at any single one of these parts of the industry as a kind of placeholder, and saying that these all have value, they all inform each other, there's incredible innovations across the board, and that we really do shift our perspective around how are we going to approach all of this work, and not just, okay, we're waiting to get back to in person.
And I think we kind of talked about this a little bit last week, and I know I'm usually down on the kind of remote stuff we talked about with the year-end best of list, rather, that I think there are cool things. Like we talked about Assassin Artists, we had Lab of Shifting Rules, we've had if I'm going to botch the presentation unless Blake bails me out, the one based in Japan.
Obaken escaping from the killer,
Yes.
or whatever that fabulous subtitle is. Not to cut you off, though, Kevin, but I think, in your defense, as someone who has been a little bit more down on at-home immersive, the shows that you're... excuse me. Sorry, cut that little bit down the wrong pipe. In defense of you, Kevin, the shows you're describing are all kind of the standout innovators here. There has been a lot of very lazy online work from companies not used to doing remote work that have just sort of cut and pasted in-person techniques without considering how the change in medium is going to affect how they play. Assassin Artist, Lab of Shifting Rules, and Obaken all played with distance as a enabling function that gave them their central strengths. And so I think we're seeing really a split in at-home remote immersive between shows that are stronger and start from a central premise of, okay, I'm performing something remotely, what can I do? And things that they themselves believe themselves to be a placeholder. This is not necessarily just an audience and critical issue. I think it's also a creator issue.
I love that you said, use the word distance, because I think it's not just about a matter of them planning around the fact that it's a remote performance, but the ones that kind of do it well build distance into the interaction between not only performer and the audience, but the audience and the audience. Like, one of the things that makes If Musibia hiding in the dark, waiting for the killer, whatever it goes, I'm going to keep on trying until we get one of us gets right by accident, is that the distance is acknowledged, right? Like, we are in all these different spots in the world having a wrist-mounted Skype discussion with a young woman in Japan who, because of, is giving us a virtual tour of a place because of the pandemic. And in every step of that, the distance between us is not only acknowledged, it celebrates the wrong word, but it's critical to the experience.
Yeah, it's integral to the experience.
Even on just sort of a much simpler mechanical level, but equally beautifully executed, is, I guess, also in Japan. I guess they have kind of a knack for remote work at this point.
We're all closet weebs. It's okay. So.
Some of us are more closet than others. But no, the Lab of Shifting Rules just use distance to perform an incredibly elegant magic trick by having one off-screen facilitator constantly puppeting and swapping things out and moving things around when the camera's back is turned, and doing this all elegantly and silently. It took the medium and used it to enhance its presentation and what it was capable of. And it displays a level of thought that I would really like to see, should at-home immersive continue at the rate that it has been in the pandemic, which, my money in, it should. We're having a surge. I don't want this to mean that we have no theater. In that case, I'd really like to see that same level of thought going in.
Well, and I think that... Sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
I think this is one of the things we've talked about in our review crew a lot, too, is that, I think there's a space for this work to continue to exist, because I never would have done these shows with you, Blake, because we're not in the same spot, but I've done a bunch of escape rooms with you. I've done a bunch with Patrick. I've done a bunch with Laura, and a bunch with all the rest of the NoPro crew. And so hopefully they do kind of continue to take the lessons learned from these stronger shows and pull them into more remote work that is accessible to people, and it doesn't matter where you are, and you can be safe, or even if it's just you don't want to drive somewhere to go to an escape room tonight, you can do something cool. So hopefully more people do take these lessons and really try to understand what has made them work over the last year and a half, and continue to drive it forward in this kind of virtual space.
Right.
In theory,
I was just going to jump in really quick to say, I think that, Blake pointing out distance specifically is one key element. And I think there's also other very thoughtful, well-crafted approaches. Again, the intentionality behind it. So the adjacent possible is another, but that used anonymity. So it wasn't about, and now there were actually people from all over the country, the US, there were people from all over the world in the performance that I joined and in other performances. They actually reached, I don't remember the final tally. They were trying to reach someone in Antarctica. So there was a goal for this to be a truly global experience throughout all of the performances. But the point being that in that case, there was something that was so absolutely integral that highlighted, I mean, not just highlighted, that really infused the performance with the magic that I don't think that it could have had otherwise, at least not in that iteration. So I think that there are these different elements of, again, really looking at what does remote, what does virtual offer you? And there have been other shows that we've talked about, certainly that I've talked about, like Out There or TM, or The Sleepover. We've talked about these different shows that really understand the technology, the platforms that they're using, and craft with that in mind. And so it can be about distance, but it can also be about other elements like anonymity.
It's funny you bring up anonymity, because I think if we're having this discussion, we can't, have it completely without talking about Odyssey Works' Book of Separation, which, for all of its flaws, and I know it had some flaws, I know Noah eloquently wrote about the effects a glitch can have on how a piece lands in this remote era, but the way that even, intimacy and knowledge of one another can be leveraged over a remote connective platform, that distance is certainly one element, I agree with you, but that isn't to say that is the one color you're allowed to paint with or seasoning you're allowed for your food.
Right.
That we still have the full toolkit. We just have to be judicious in how we use them. To use another flavor metaphor, Laura, whenever you have to cook on an airplane, I learned this from Food Network, overseason the food. Your taste is dulled at altitude, and so overseasoned food is going to taste like normal food on a plane. We're somewhere different right now. That somewhere is online. We still have all the same seasonings. The ratios are just going to need to change.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's something also in what you guys are talking about that's making me think about, the buzzword of the season. Well, one of the buzzwords of the season, metaverse. And, one of the things that makes the way it's being used right now ring so hollow is that, aside from, an inability to acknowledge the roots of the term, from cyberpunk dystopias, based on the hollowness of 1980s American shopping mall culture, which is where it arises from in Snow Crash. But this sense that just the new shiny is going to be the thing that leads you into the promised land in order to make people pump a bunch of money into investments, right? Because we still live in a culture dominated by finance and investor culture at the highest levels. But this idea that the work that we've been watching for the past couple of years, the good stuff that plays around with connecting people at a distance, at leveraging anonymous identity, letting people take on a role that they wouldn't necessarily take on otherwise, which is, the equivalent of donning an avatar in a VR space. That all of these things, these techniques, beyond just the simple technical parts of them, whether or not you're able to connect people via a Zoom call, get people into a VR chat world and avatar them up, make sure the connection doesn't drop. Beyond those fundamentals, there's a way of gathering people at a distance. There's an art to it. and that the people who are making the interesting immersive work online are in dialogue with the people who make the interesting immersive work offline, because those physical world experiences require the same kind of thoughtfulness around giving the audience a role, letting them step out of themselves, creating a space where they, can let go of their normal persona, finding ways to connect them.
May I piggyback off you a little bit there?
Please,
because
riff.
this is actually really tying into a lot of kind of my frustrations in the discussion around the artistic and specifically theatrical possibilities of the metaverse and Web 3.0, or whatever it is we're calling it now. And that is this idea that the metaverse and Web 3.0, enabled by blockchain, is all about persistence and about permanence, and everything at the end of the day being tied back to you, your meat self, and your central immutable identity. And one of my coming into immersive theater, originally from more of a background in LARP, I really feel like one of my central joys within the space is this mutability of the self. And I think a lot of the time and a lot of the sort of pre-launch buzzy discussion around the theatrical possibilities of the metaverse are either celebrating or failing to acknowledge properly that within a structured metaverse, as it seems to be commonly understood, there is a persistence of self. And that persistence of self, I think, is going to be one of these really big obstacles to creating true metaverse theater, as opposed to creating immersive in more discrete online formats. If I'm talking gibberish, someone step in.
No. I think what you're talking to is, there is this inherent tension between, particularly when we hear people talk about, they start going like, oh, it's Web 3.0 is going to take the best of Web 1.0. And it's like, well, part of the best of Web 1.0 is like, no one knew you were a dog, right? And like the great battle of Web 2.0 was, I remember when Facebook was, very much like, oh, you can have one account, one identity. This is your true self. And it's your truest self. And you can even see that, in the culture of, even like the culture of Tumblr, right? Who are you really? Do you have the authority to speak on this? Are you pretending to be something you're not? All of that stuff was something we kind of warred over in 2.0, when 1.0 was like, online, I can be someone who I'm not allowed to be in real life. And then Web 2.0 culturally has been, Web 2.0 is realer than real. It's the digital spirit realm that like impacts the real world. I mean, it's how we got Trump, like the power of Twitter was how we got Trump.
I mean, yeah, it's Twitter all day. We're just like vomiting your id out there.
Yeah.
At all times.
Yeah.
Space is now a post-reality reality.
Yeah, and it is subservient to the fictional reality that is social media. So then the 3.0, which is so much of his, Jack of Twitter actually had like an early morning rant, and like something has shifted in Silicon Valley, because suddenly all of the crypto guys are warring amongst themselves. It was inevitable. But this idea of who's going to own, like it's now about who owns the internet. Which parts of the internet do you own? Right? Like I own this NFT. I own this avatar in this space, and I can resell it. And the idea that it almost seems like the identity's attached to, I have legal standing to own something, therefore I have personhood because I am an owner. and all must be owners in order to have personhood in Web 3.0. And if you're not an owner, you're a borrower or you're a copier. You have a right-click mentality, and you don't have the real thing. That is what only ownership is authentic.
I don't want to get too much into it, but again, it's so funny that these fucking tech bros just like hilariously misunderstood what Snow Crash was doing, saying, pointing out. Like it's so off base. Like it's what it wasn't supposed to become.
What's that tweet? We're inventing the death vortex from that classic novel. Don't invent the death
vortex. Yeah. We're pleased to announce. Yeah, and the fact that it was like William Gibson is the one who like popularized that tweet is like just extra. It's the cherry on top of the sundae, right? You know, and it's like, you know, I see people cheering the financialization of everything, and so I'm so thankful when Brian Eno comes out and like boos it. But this idea, it's kind of maybe to get back to your point, Blake, or what I was hearing your point was one of the things that's great about the act of play, and play is at the heart of all of this immersive experiential work, is the shedding of the self for some period of time in order to understand that you are not just the limited role that society puts upon you.
I guess I 100% agreed. You got what I'm saying perfectly. And I guess I just want to go back to kind of a right before the pandemic story that I've never told on the air before, and I don't know if I've actually told to any of you, about sort of our very own Cheyenne treated me as a going away gift from New York to a ticket the month before it closed to Then She Fell. And one of the things that struck me the most about that show was the vulnerability that I was allowed to embody within that space. Those of you who know me from the podcast know that I am opinionated and a little bit prickly on occasion, but, you know, generally good-spirited, I hope. But
you're the cinnamon to the rest of our sugar.
Thank you. That is more flattering than I deserve.
That's because I'm sugar.
But no. Then She Fell was this fantastic space where I was allowed to be things like vulnerable and obedient, and, you know, there were moments in there, you know, when an actor walks in on you trying to use your big wheel of keys to unlock a tiny cabinet and you can't find the right one, and they walk in with you and you feel like your hand is in the cookie jar and you get this moment of bizarre flustering and shame. These are all also positive selves, things that we would call pro-social emotions. You know, that when we live in a very cynical society, we often don't get to exhibit in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah,
oh,
and I think
man.
this goes
Yeah, go
back
for Laura.
to, right, yeah. So I just want to expand on this a little bit more in terms of, I'm going to try to link up a couple of things that we've been talking about. And so I think this idea of play, I think we often approach it as an overly simplistic idea. I think it is an incredibly, not us, this group.
Yeah,
I think
our culture. Yeah.
Yeah, broadly. So I think a recent example that
people would argue the opposite about us. So, but yes.
Right. So I think a recent example that's interesting is as we're talking about these remote productions and technology and Web 3.0 and this idea of ownership. And I think one thing that was surprising to me that I was delighted by, because it's I've done Sleep No More 3 times so far, and it's been a while since the very first time I did it. So I think there's a little bit of, taking for granted that infrastructure in that world. And when I went to Arcane, I was so relieved. There was a moment of panic because I am someone who loves to record and document. And so there was a moment of panic when they said, when I was reading the pre-show email about your phones will be locked up. And I thought, rats, like I was frustrated and felt, again, just kind of a moment of panic, like don't separate me from my phone. And then the relief of actually having it locked up in these little pouches. So it was still on my person. It wasn't out somewhere else where I thought it could be lost. But I couldn't access it. And the overwhelming relief then of being allowed to fully play and fully be present and not worry about recording or other people recording or, waiting to get a shot, or did I miss a shot of something? And I think stepping away from and because that is also a sense of ownership, this sort of I post, therefore I am mentality.
Yeah.
And so I do think that really looking at, as we're talking about not just these remote productions and how we're utilizing technology and everything with NFTs, and because NFTs are baffling to me because of the limited engagement that you have, at least my understanding, with the actual product. And so having that opportunity to have technology taken away from you. And then when our phones were unlocked at the end and I could take some photographs of the space and have those mementos and to own those moments in a sense, or own that experience in a sense, but to have also been gifted the freedom truly to just play, I think is something that we don't talk about enough in terms of intentionality in experience design.
Yeah.
But I think Arcane does, I mean, the phone thing is part of it, but I wouldn't have expected the show based on the League of Legends cartoon to be the one that like forces you into a persona and kind of that specific style of play the best this year. But it did. It was, I mean, part of it is just like a fun show. It's sandboxy, and it's like, I think that's something I always kind of do crave in immersive, but it allows you that space to like try on all these different hats and kind of play in the space and who do you want to be and how do you want to play this game, and you can shift between them. I know, Laura, we talked about that in our kind of long discussion on Arcane, but I think it is true, and I think that's probably why a lot of us are drawn to immersive stuff and immersive stuff that works specifically, kind of like Blake was saying about Then She Fell. But I think that's what we crave, and I think in a year like this, it's been an especially like kind of high craving in terms of like what can you do in these spaces, in these worlds, whether it's virtual or in person, and it's been a big thing. And
Yeah.
I wanted to highlight my own Then She Fell story from, I think, probably the same month you went, like, and how good that show is at kind of forcing you into it. I don't normally like connect with shows in that way, but I end up in the room with all the flowers on the walls after you paint them. And I kind of like, I stood there and I was just like taking it in and almost zoned out, just kind of feeling like the presence of everybody else in the space. And then the orderly finally came to me. She's like, "Sir, we need to leave this room." And it was like, holy shit. Like I was so like into that moment. And Then She Fell just does that so well. And I know we can talk about Then She Fell for hours and hours on this show, but I just want to shout that out.
Just to piggyback on something you were saying, and I guess what the idea that we're circling around, and forgive me from cribbing from Sondheim, but if you're going to crib from someone, crib from the greats, rest in peace. But I've been listening to the complete Sondheim, and the other day I finally listened to The Frogs because I'd never listened to it before. And I think that there is this idea in that show that we're circling around over and over about how play is inherently an act of resistance against a stagnating reality. That play is a way in which you imagine other possibilities, and without that, things don't change. And in a year that has been very bad, out of a series of years that have been very bad for most people, I think we need play. And I think that, while ownership and play are not necessarily completely incompatible. Ownership is not play, and the two should not be confused.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Concur. Also, you stated that out in such a way that like sort of steeled my resolve for. It reminded me of like why I so desperately want to have, why I want to gather like the community of creators is for reinvigorating that exact idea, right? Like the phrasing you used also remind me of like at the second IDS, Jenny Weinblum gave a talk about immersive as rehearsal for resistance. That's like one of the things it could do. But this idea that play itself is sort of, it's always, it's not a rehearsal for resistance, it's an act of resistance against the status quo, right? We are given a role by society, and the thing that is great about acting as an actor, when you are an actor, is you find yourself stepping outside of the role that you are prescribed to do in your day-to-day life, and you take on the traits of someone else. You do different actions. It may all be make-believe, but the magic of it all is that everyone around you behaves as if it's not. And when the acting really works, everyone is responding very emotionally, realistically to your made-up actions. And that's one of the things that's so incredible about any immersive experience. It's also one of the things, like, thinking back to like pre-pandemic remote shows, thinking about the kind of work that Kate Lane or Elizabeth Faye Stranahan do, where you are having those moments where someone is responding very authentically to you, and it stops feeling like you're watching a performance. It never feels like you're watching a performance, but it's like you're having a Skype call. I won't use the Z word. You're having a Skype call with like the weirdest friend you know, and you just get kind of lost in that little alternate reality you have with them.
I don't know if Jenny Weinblum mentioned this, but I think an important qualifier, at least from my perspective, is that play is not just an act of resistance, it's an act of empathetic resistance. And I feel like we talk, or I guess I feel like there's a little bit more of an emphasis around empathy and tools that are empathy drivers in regards to VR. But I feel like there are, again, when I think back on how many great experiences I had a chance to explore this year, whether they were remote, whether they were in person, they were deeply empathetic. And that I do think that play, I think that's another very important component of what play is, what play actively does, how play is shared.
So I think
All right.
kind of on that note, I'm going to use it to spin off in kind of a slightly different direction. Was there, I know what I kind of was chasing this year was like work that, I don't want to kind of back to your earlier point, Laura, that like, not to simplify it, but the shows I was chasing this year were like the ones that let you play and were just kind of fun to go through, whether it was Assassin Artist, whether it was Creep, whether it was Arcane, whether it was just, I did Welcome to Metal Arc Falls, the Very Merry Christmas contest. I just finished that up. There are these kind of fun, for the most part, light shows, and that's kind of what I was seeking this year. It seems like, based on the stuff that I enjoyed, are kind of like 1 and 2 at 10. Was there anything that you guys were like chasing this year in terms of the immersive work that you were going to?
I don't know if there was anything specific that I was chasing. I think most of us share this, that we try to go in as cold as possible. We try to allow for as much discovery as possible. So I think there were a number of times that either shows were recommended to me, or it was something that I stumbled across, and I would try to go into it knowing the least amount possible to allow for maximum discovery. And I think, again, overwhelmingly, I think what I feel like I kept running up against was this incredible mix of real compassion, and a real permission to just explore and feel. And sometimes that was, a more like emotional, moving experience. Sometimes that was a very joyful experience. Sometimes it was more restorative. But I think that there was the universal theme from the experiences that I had a chance to participate in, I do think there was a real sensibility around compassion and permission and solidarity.
I would follow up by saying I feel like I was seeking something kind of similar, that my main interest going into 2021 was finding shows that provoked a depth of emotion. You know, looking back at kind of some of my top shows of 2020, loved shows like Thicket. But that was a show, the reason that show stood out to me, kind of in the pandemic era, was that it provoked this real sense of joy and discovery and involvement. I know you weren't overly as big a fan of it as me, but I was going in this year not just looking for joy, I guess, but looking for anything that could get me to feel intensely within the reality that it created, no matter what that emotion was. And that's why something like If Musibia hiding in the dark, escaping from the killer, yes, I got it right that time.
You looked it up.
I did not look it up. I did not look it up. That came to me as I was saying it. And the minute it came out of my mouth, I knew it. But that's why that stood out to me, because that was, one of the first pandemic pieces that really, this year, that really got me jumpy and jittery and made me believe in the reality of the horror scenario. It's why I, despite some mixed opinions, really left with fond memories and high reviews for Blackheart Ghosts. That was a show that kind of, almost in a good way, let me wallow in self-pity, that it was a show that just was that emo fantasy of the dark pool of sadness that we can all just mire ourselves in and admire the beauty inherent in our universal tragedy. That was a show that caused a depth of emotion, and an emotion that I don't really encounter in my day-to-day life. And so I feel like the successful shows this year were those that really picked a mood, picked a tone, and made me believe it.
I think that's absolutely right, because Kevin and I went together to Creep. I mean, it was his second time going, my first. And even though horror in general is not my favorite thing, and I guess I want to clarify my statements, because as I think there's a general perception of what like compassion is, or, solidarity. And like, that doesn't necessarily sound cohesive with horror. And yet, Kevin will tell you, I was incredibly vocal throughout the entire Creep experience because I was delighted. So even as I was screaming because I was startled, there was a jump scare, I was so invested, I was so present, because that world had been so thoughtfully crafted, and because I felt like through the performances I was given this permission to just play and to suspend my disbelief, to release into this particular world and these characters. And so there were times that I would be startled, I would scream, I would then start laughing, I would make comments to different characters, and it was, so I think I guess I just wanted to clarify that I think there are things that when I refer to like compassion and solidarity and empathy, and it doesn't necessarily mean like a somber or deeply emotional and, or Hallmark experience. It can be horror, but it has to do with again, how thoughtfully crafted and designed the experience is, and how the audience is given permission because of, or through that beautifully crafted design, you feel safe and you feel like you're given permission to just relax and release into it and play.
Yeah, and I think we're coming back to the idea that like how well it integrates you into the world, and it doesn't have to be like as a character. Creep definitely doesn't really do that. It just kind of puts you in this world and lets you kind of the world let loose on you rather than like let loose on that world.
Right.
And it works, and it just generates kind of, yeah, those like fun feelings, because it's like it's a haunted house, but you kind of get to know the characters a little bit, or like you have some idea of their backstory through those later parts, and that's what makes it work. And I think that also kind of echoed through Delusion too. Like the best parts of that are the one where like it feels you like you're part of these world with these characters and can empathize with them and feel like you're in that space and like understand what's going on with them. So I think it's just kind of like you said, it doesn't have to be limited to any specific genre. It can work, whether it's horror, or kind of lighthearted, or absurdist, or eccentric, or kind of whatever it's trying to do.
Yeah, for me, the big thing, I didn't set out, to chase a particular thing, but what I found myself responding to the most were the experiences that really allowed me to just escape. And I think like as someone who's like, been honed in the culture, I can often think of escapism as a bad word. I mean, I consume a lot of escapist stuff. I engage with a lot of escapist material, and in immersive, being like, like the critic, I'm not necessarily supposed to be looking for that. And yet, whether it's Delusion or Creep or The Sleepover, which I guess that was last year, or, Hearts of Darkfield, or I'm trying to think of like more online stuff, and like nothing's coming to mind. Well, like Tales from the Galaxy's Edge, right? Like Star Wars. Hi, Noah. There you go. Drink.
Almost an hour. Almost an
hour. Escapism, I think, is underrated, and which is funky because so much of our culture is just rooted into it. But I feel like when we dismiss escapism as low art, as low entertainment, I think we miss opportunities to inject and endow that work with something more. Arcane is pretty heavy duty escapism, but woven into that cartoon are some like kind of big themes about inequality. There's some thought going on in that writer's room that isn't what you would necessarily expect out of a cartoon based on a video game. And because of how well Secret Cinema hewed to the realities of that world, those ideas resonated, even if they weren't present in the text of the show, the live show, because they were drawing on the characters, situations, and iconography of Arcane. They were inevitably drawing upon those themes. It also makes me think about the thing that I've come to realize the most in the past year with any and all media is that it really is character über alles for me. Like just character. I either love the characters or I just do not care about the worlds. Like I don't care about your lore. I don't care about your production design. I don't care about like how many teraflops of GPU power you're pushing through. If the characters aren't interesting, I'm going to wander off and like read a book with some interesting characters. So with that in mind, take a moment to think about this. Of all the things you've done, and maybe let's try and set aside Arcane and Creep and Delusion, also because they're so LA centric. So think about, other things you've done this year. It could be LA things, but other things you've done this year, where you've encountered a character. It doesn't have to be a performance. It could be, character you found on the page, or a character who like is implied through, the text of the work. What character, does anyone have a character that like stands out to them? I know, just like dropped a stumper on you guys.
I'll just, maybe this will buy Blake and Kevin a little bit of time and they can say something brilliant, but I'm going to add an addendum to this. What were you chasing? I also think that there were times where I was chasing, I was like, please give me what I don't even know that I need right now. And I do think that there were experiences, there were shows, there were performances where, and the one that's most top of mind again is the adjacent possible. I didn't know that I needed that particular type of experience to feel those feelings through that particular design. And so that was definitely something that I felt like because of 2020, I really trusted so many. I mean, Blake was absolutely right to cite at the top of the show that there has been a lot of poor design. And I think it's mostly well-intentioned. People are innovating, they're innovating in real time. But I think there were so many overwhelmingly great shows and great experiences that I did really feel like I could trust people. And so I was also sometimes chasing, please give me what I don't even know that I need. An in-person example would have been Hive Rise, which is LA specific and was only 2 nights. So that was something that I don't think previously I had ever, felt that way about chasing that specific, that kind of desire. In terms of characters, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and Blake.
So, I was you made a few minutes to mull it over, and I think, so one of them, just because it's fresh in my mind, I mentioned earlier, I did Welcome to Middle Art Falls, their second show, and it picked up where their last Christmas show left off. They've both kind of versions of postal plays, but there's these video and audio segments during each of them where they pick up with the characters and you kind of get to know them, and it's nothing like brand new, and it's really playing on rom-com tropes, but it feels nice to like return to these characters. I did that the second one this weekend. It was like, it's just kind of like a warm, fuzzy feeling with this Christmas theme show and these nice characters, and everything works out in the end, and they got what wanted. But I think even you can take kind of those basic character tropes and still use them properly, because I mean that's when tropes are used properly, they work to kind of drive those characters and that feeling that the show is going for. And the other kind of offbeat one is, I think, the sort of player characters, I'll call them, in If Musevia, Lavish Shifting Rules, and Assassin Artist, who you kind of get to know during the course of the show. And they're not really characters, but things happen to them, or you kind of have to prevent things from happening to them. And it's, again, a pretty simple thing, but it drives a lot of empathy in kind of how you react to those shows and what you have to do, or what you're trying to do to like get the protagonist out of the killer's house, or kind of how you have to interact with the character in Assassin Artist, or what happens near the end of Lavish Shifting Rules, kind of what you have to do to like kind of help them through these scenarios, even as they've been helping you the whole time. So I think that's kind of like an odd one, but it was one that weirdly worked. And I think, I mean, we've talked about those shows are very good, but what they strive to do in their production too.
So it's very funny, Noah, that you mentioned that this character doesn't necessarily have to be a performance, because one of the characters that really stuck out for me this year was pretty much the one and only character in Unravel by Spectrapulse in Philadelphia. Quick refresher on what the show was. It was a haunted house horror show in which You, an audience of one, played a detective's assistant for one Detective Montgomery who had broken his arm to help him investigate a suspicious death. Maybe a suicide, maybe related to a cult. Of course, it's related to a cult. That's why you're coming to the show. But slowly, over the course of the show, the entire narrative is really built around this character of Detective Montgomery. And I'll admit, in my review, although I loved the piece, I was fairly critical of the actor who played Detective Montgomery's performance. I called it a little bit flat. But the character of Detective Montgomery shined through, and this narrative turn of this very arch, spectacular Pulp Fiction murder where a serial killer calling himself the Angel of Death has killed a girl. And then shrinking that down to this small personal tragedy for one sad, overwhelmed man. That was really a beautiful narrative stroke. And that character has stuck with me because, as you were saying, that character was so central to the story and effect the piece was trying to convey.
I'll jump back in for a second to say that my favorite characters, as I'm sitting here listening to Kevin and Blake and thinking about, okay, what did I, see this year? I actually think that some of my favorite characters were real people. And I'm specifically thinking of 1,000 Ways, both part 1 over the phone and part 2, an encounter, which was in person. And in a way, because of my limited knowledge about both of these people, these fellow participants, they almost feel like characters to me. I have such limited knowledge of who they are, and yet I also feel like I really know them. They feel more like friends than anything. And that is so incredibly powerful. These are real people out there in the world who just responded very honestly with vulnerability. And I have thought of both of them throughout the year and wondered how they are and what they're doing. And I just think that is, I think it is so incredibly powerful.
So I would be a fool not to piggyback off of what you said, Laura, and say that, in a year where online LARP was a thing, you actually portrayed one of my favorite characters of the year.
I did?
You were so spectacular the other week when you were playing my sister.
Oh, yeah, in Savage Hall.
You were fantastic. The fact that I was able to develop this rapport and relationship with your character over Zoom in the course of an hour really took a piece that I was pretty meh on and turned it into a really fun evening. And remember, I was doing that with a fever of about 101 that night. So 1,000 snaps to you for saving that for me.
Oh, you're very kind. I think that is a great example, though, also of how our team, I think everyone did a fantastic job. And it was such a delightful evening because our group had committed so thoroughly and really tried to embody these characters as we're learning about them in real time. We're being given these pieces of information through these different kind of audio chapters. And that was another highlight, because it did feel like, whether as I'm citing these other participants or we're talking about a LARPing situation, that kind of commitment, I'm essentially stating the obvious here, but it makes all the difference. And it, again, gives you that permission to just fully drop in and play and not censor yourself or not feel inhibited in any way.
There's something to be said with both your experiences with IRL people that you met in these in these pieces, and Blake's experience of you playing a character, where what makes the characters work, what makes the connections to these people work, are the structures that are given, right? Like, you wouldn't necessarily be having these experiences of other people if the sandbox wasn't there, if the experience wasn't constructed in a way that allowed for that.
Yes, exactly.
And it's weird because it's like, I wish I could give like a 3-point piece of advice to creators to say, like, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, you will successfully create this. But it isn't simple, because, we're talking about incredibly different experiences, but there's a I guess at the end of the day, there's a principle of giving space for something to emerge, and for something to emerge specifically from the participants, and not just be, forcing a performance on the audience, but creating room and creating space for the audience to become the participants, to become the co-creators of the work.
I mean, I think the broad recommendation would be have a sense of intentionality in terms of how these things are designed, and what like, if everything's thought through, it makes it much easier for the people to slide into that world and their place in it, whether it kind of is a little off kilter or it's something grounded in realism. I know we kind of come back to that idea a lot too, is just the thought behind these shows is so important, and it's like the first step to anything that is actually gonna work and be affecting and create that connection and generate that empathy, and all these things I think we've been talking about for the last hour or so. Kind of comes back to that idea. Or not.
Does someone want to run with it? All right, I'll segue us out. All right, we'll take a mental pause here and segue us into looking ahead. None of this will get recorded. We'll go right from Kevin's bit to this next section. So just think for a second. I'm going to ask all of you if there's something you're hopeful for being in 2022. Okay, so take a minute or two to think about that, and I'll spring it on. Once someone's got something else, I'll spring the actual transition for everybody.
I got something.
Okay. All right, we'll do the transition. Okay, we've been at this for a little over an hour, and this is the end of the year show. Now, I don't want to do predictions because always in motion is the future, and anything we might predict right now will probably be just already silly in about a week. But I wanted to ask you all if there's anything you're hopeful for and that you hope to see in the year ahead. Blake, we ended with you in All the Cycle earlier. Let's start with you now, also because we know that you've got something. You volunteered while we were having a quiet, invisible break.
So, to start, I just want to give y'all an idea of my mental state right now. Earlier this week, I was listening to a New Year's playlist, and the original Sherman Brothers recording of There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow came on and made me cry. So, that's where I'm at right now in terms of feelings around hope for the future. But I was thinking back to when one of my weird, hopeful highlights of this year was, weirdly enough, spending way too much on tickets to go see The Burnt City with my sister. And, with Omicron, with the inevitable next letter of the Greek alphabet, who knows what's going to happen in July when I'm supposed to go. But I'm hopeful, and I'm sure that there will be what I was looking for in that piece, and that there's going to be new worlds to explore. And there's going to be new sights to see, and emotions and stories to embrace. And no matter what form they take, it's both my privilege and my job, I suppose, to embrace those openly. So no matter what it is, I couldn't be more excited.
Excellent. Kevin or Laura?
I can jump in.
Kevin, go for it.
I think kind of to piggyback off what Blake's saying, I just want to be excited by a show and not just like, oh, that show was an exciting thing to go to, but excited and surprised by something. Like, I think we keep coming back to Arcane, but that show didn't have to be as good as it was, based off, I mean, it has the secret cinema kind of pedigree, but I wasn't expecting to have as much fun in that world that I kind of knew nothing about immediately prior to the show, to the way it played and was kind of gamified and mixed and matched some pieces. So I think just to find something new, whether it's kind of a blending of kind of the more commercial things with immersive work, or even something like with Creep, where they've kind of found new ways to push forward in terms of they have this space and are they going to use it, and they've used it a few other times in other things, and how people are going to drive and even things like the immersive escape room remote things that I've really connected with. I wouldn't have expected those a year ago, and I think to have them now was cool. So I hope that continues forward into next year too, is these kind of surprising things that I wouldn't have expected out of immersive, or to connect with, and to find more things like that.
What I have to say is really a continuation on both what Kevin and Blake said. I'm hopeful that we are not going to press pause on anything. I'm hopeful that we are not going to box anything up and try to put it away or put it, quote unquote, back. I think that I've said this before, and I think it bears repeating. I am not trying to minimize any of the devastation and heartbreak of the pandemic. And I also believe that there have been so many positives that have come out of it. I hope that we continue to innovate across the board, that there's less gatekeeping, that there is less siloing, that there is more diversity. We've seen how there's been more accessibility. And I'm hopeful that we're going to continue down that path, and that there's going to be a lot less energy that is directed at, again, kind of debating what something is or isn't, or thinking of something as like a placeholder, or that it is like a lower rung on the ladder, and that all of the work is going to be truly celebrated, that it's going to be truly supported, and that it's truly available to people, because we've already seen now during this incredibly difficult and truly horrific time that there is so much that can come out of it. And I don't mean to oversimplify, but I really do think we have seen such incredible work. And I'm really hopeful that there isn't going to be I think now there's hopefully going to be less of a, again, like getting, quote unquote, back to things, that it is truly about saying kind of the, improv, like yes and whether that's the digital work, whether that's the in-person work, that it really is all about yes anding.
And what about you, Noah? What are you looking forward to, or hoping for at least, in the coming year?
Well, on this very day, I'm as I mentioned before we start recording, I'm in a very pessimistic space, and I think the thing, there's so many things arrayed at the at the levels above our pay grade, if you will, right? The political climate, the general cultural climate, the all of the excitement about Web3 from the financial sector, and how that is shaping which projects get funded in the cultural space. And what I'm hoping for is that the things that people have maybe written off, and the the work that allows people to be connected, that it's given a chance to make a real comeback. It's given a chance to establish itself. That we get to have Sleep No More opening back up in New York in February or thereabouts. That we see Burnt City and Arkham open in London. That Star Cruiser, which I've not been paying attention to the PR campaign at all, but apparently has been having a very bumpy PR campaign.
It's like, so cursed, Noah.
Like,
it's
no,
so cursed.
someone described to me what happened, and I was like, they did what now? And then they pulled it, and like, oh my goodness. But that the proof winds up being in the eating, right? And that the actual work, knowing who's working on it, I'm sure the actual work is going to be fantastic. They've drawn in the best people they could find on the planet, people whose work we've all enjoyed. Like I will tell you guys some stuff out of school, and so like that people do the thing and love the thing, and we will see we'll see that hype cycles matter less than actual quality, and that we start to move out of a world where perception is reality into one where the reality is the reality, and it can be more clearly perceived. So that's my hope. That's my wish, if you will, for 2022 as we enter into it. And I think that extends outside of our realm into the world as a whole. All right. On that note, there'll probably be a formal closing, so I'll savor that. But any last things you guys want to chime in here before we say goodbye to our second pandemic year?
No, it's just that this was delightful. Thank you all so much for such another great conversation.
I guess the one thing I have to say is that I came into this half prepared to, pour myself a drink for the office holiday party, and I think we had one of the most interesting and intense conversations about the current state of immersive art and its future, and it's why I'm always...
What do you think an office party here is? No.
It's why I'm so thankful to have such an awesome, group of writers here with me who are just as passionate about this insane, constantly evolving art form that has entranced all of us.
Kevin, last words?
Yeah, I'm thankful for this conversation. I think all the conversations we've had throughout the year, it's been great to, I think, connect with the wider kind of NoPro crew through the review crews and just have discussions about immersive and get all these different takes and opinions and thoughts, and it's been awesome.
Once again, I want to thank Blake and Kevin and Laura for joining me this week to send off the year. At least it wasn't 2020. And now the promised riffing on having to close down the next stage. Look, I started a version of this and it was getting way too melancholy. So I'm not sure how much I really want to unpack, mostly because I'm in a better headspace than I was expecting to be. Was pretty much dreading this being the end result. As soon as the word about Omicron came out over the Thanksgiving break, that really soured the Thanksgiving break as well. And then just sort of watch the next few weeks. Just so everyone knows, I think I mentioned this at the top, we will not be attempting this form. Part of that is the fact that the Pasadena Playhouse is booked up pretty much into the summer. We don't have any dates we can drop this that we like. So we're not going to attempt to do it. We have started conversations with some other spots, not necessarily all of them in Los Angeles. And that sounds elaborate. We started conversations in one spot, just in case that person's listening. I'm not talking to anybody else right now. Well, how many people is he talking? Just one. I'm talking to one person right now. But that unlocks a whole network of things. And we're, landing this event is tricky because there's so many different stakeholders and there's so many different big events that attract our folks. So pretty much every season has 2 events, major events for some faction of the immersive world. And it gets, that's our trouble. That's our struggle. We'll figure something out. We are likely to do something around the spring fling time, something in late March, maybe something hybrid. We haven't really had conversations yet. We're giving ourselves some time. We're going to do some basic publishing next week. I'm taking a bit of a step back and trying to look at the shape of this. This one's rough because the success of the event was, in my mind at least, sort of a prerequisite for what comes next, for the growth of what we're doing with the Institute, which is the 501c3 that we're forming, with the kind of work that I want to be doing going forward, the kind of work that I want NoPro to be doing as a whole, with the idea of getting us more resources to do better work, to go deeper. And we're in a time when there's even more interest in the kinds of work that we do. And we don't have the resources to meet the demand, particularly a demand for free work that we're always getting. Everyone wants to pick our brains for free, and we only have so much time. So not having the event is definitely a setback. And some of you have been really fantastic, and people have donated to our tax deductible fund, which is great. And we'll be talking more about that in the future. And like I said, going to do something, maybe some hybrid event in March, late March, marking the anniversary of when the original summit would have been, like we did last year. There's a lot of it comes down to me needing to reconnect with the mission, because the mission became something so specific over the past 2 years, which was like, get the damn summit up. And since that's not happening, how the mission manifests, and when the summit emerges, whatever form it takes, which I'm not going to speculate on right now, but I do know that there's certain things that we were doing that I don't want to try to execute on anymore. That doesn't mean not mixing performance work and talks, quite the opposite. But it does mean, well, I don't want to get into details, because there's no details to be had yet. There's just where my instincts are going, and the team and I get to sit down and we get to talk and sort of, start with a blank page. Knowing what we know now about the way that the pandemic continues to unfold, knowing what we know now about where the work is going, how things are evolving, how do we want to make a unique event that brings the creative community together? That's a question in front of us right now, and we're going to come up with something, and it's going to be better than what we were trying to do. It just is, because I said so. And we'll never be able to test the theory because we weren't able to try and do what we were trying to do. Anyway, it's not the best note to end a year on. That's for damn certain. And as I'm recording this, I'm realizing, I've been really not thinking about this as much as I can for the past few days. just working through the logistics of closing out all the business side of it. And luckily that's been going pretty smoothly. I think I mentioned at the start, we were released from financial obligations. That's a real breath of fresh air, sigh of relief, because if we hadn't been, I would have been like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do for rent in a couple of months. But, contrary to popular belief, I'm not an eccentric millionaire. And that's been weighing on my mind a lot too. Not in that way. I mean, yes, in that way, but more just like, because I'm not a person of means, I don't know if I get to keep doing this work. That's been a theme of late. It seems impractical. I mean, it is impractical. Let's be certain, but it feels increasingly unsustainable. And the summit was supposed to be one of the things that made it sustainable. That being said, I'm a clever boy. I'll figure something out. I'm already starting to figure things out, and it's taking me all my willpower to not just start brainstorming live in front of you. So, you have enough monologuists in your life as it is, i.e., you listen to this podcast enough, and you've got hopefully a wonderful weekend ahead of you. I've got a chill weekend of resetting everything and doing maintenance, and then a few chill days of reading. We will be back full steam the week after next. Again, no podcast this coming week, but we will. We may be publishing review rundown if enough stuff comes in. And barring that, we're just gonna live hollow for a second. Do we lose the initiative on all the people who bought Oculuses? No, not really. People will find us sooner or later. That's the way it happens. All right. Let's do the credits. We mentioned them at the beginning. We're going to mention them again. Thank you to Ari Herstand, Brittany, Deborah Robinson, Elaine, Jay Bushman, Jerome Joseph Gentis, David Bassick, Lonnie Hanson, Mark Balthazar, Samuel Mystery, Sidney Guillory, and Jan Budman for being the rocks we built this on. The associate producer of this podcast is Parker Sella. Music for No Proscenium is by Chris Porter of the Speakeasy Society. Special thanks to Siobhan O'Loughlin for voicing our intro. Catherine Yu is the editor of No Proscenium, the executive editor of No Proscenium, the website. The NoPro podcast is written, edited, hosted, produced, and mixed, barely mixed this time, by yours truly. I'm Noah Nelson. And until next time, 2 weeks from now. Well, I won't see you at the show because I'll be home. Let's think of a different one. Right. Oh yeah, the other one. Until next time, thank you for wearing the mask.